Take a look at the salt shaker on your dinner table. Today, it costs a few cents, and you don't spend a single second thinking about it. But for thousands of years, this exact white powder was the most dangerous, heavily taxed, and fiercely contested strategic asset on Earth. It was the oil of the ancient world. It built the Roman Empire, financed global armies, and a single tax on it literally sparked the bloodiest revolution in European history. You've been told that the current global struggle over Taiwan's microchips, Africa's cobalt, and South America's lithium is a brand new phenomenon of the high tech age. But it isn't. The geopolitical chessboard hasn't changed at all. The world powers are playing the exact same game they played 500 years ago. They just swapped the chemical formula. Contrast the simple ancient rock of salt with the mind boggling complexity of a modern semiconductor. To build just one advanced microchip, the supply chain requires over 1,000 individual manufacturing steps, utilizing 300 distinct materials, crossing international borders 70 times, and running headfirst into 50 separate geopolitical choke points. Yet the underlying human reflex is identical. To show you how massive this game has become since the Roman days, in 2025 alone, the mineral industries contributed a staggering $4 trillion to the US economy. We like to think that global trade is a free market, but history proves that when a commodity becomes essential for survival, the state will always step in to monopolize it. In fact, this modern monopoly game officially began in 1921 when the US Army issued the world's first official strategic mineral list, realizing that future wars would be won or lost in the mines. To understand why nations would launch massive military invasions over a common mineral, you have to imagine a world entirely devoid of modern technology. Imagine a world with no refrigerators, no chemical preservatives, no cold chain logistics. In this world, the moment an animal is slaughtered or a crop is harvested, the countdown begins. Within days, bacteria takes over. Meat rots, food turns into poison. In a world before electricity, humanity faced a brutal, recurring winter death trap. There was only one technology on the entire planet that could stop time. Only one substance could preserve proteins, feed marching armies across vast continents, and allow global maritime trade ships to cross oceans without running out of food: salt. Without salt, large scale civilization was physically impossible. It was so vital that the Roman Empire frequently paid its soldiers' wages directly in salt. This specific military allowance was called salarium, the Latin root from which the modern English word salary is derived. Your monthly paycheck is literally named after ancient rocks. And because salt was the absolute bottleneck to human survival, governments quickly realized something sinister. If you control the supply of the indispensable commodity, you control the population. But trying to completely monopolize a life saving commodity carries an extreme geopolitical risk. If you push the monopoly too far, the entire system implodes. By the 18th century, the Kingdom of France had turned the salt monopoly into a terrifying financial weapon. They established a notorious tax known as the Gabelle. Under French law, the state owned all salt production, but they didn't just tax the salt you wanted to buy. The law legally forced every single citizen over the age of 8 to purchase a fixed amount of salt every week from government warehouses at an astronomically inflated price. The system was brutally corrupt. Salt prices varied by up to 3,000% between different provinces, creating a massive, highly illegal black market smuggling network. The penalties for buying illegal non government salt were ruthless. Every year, thousands of ordinary French citizens were publicly executed, hanged, or condemned to forced labor as galley slaves. Simply for trying to buy affordable salt, the Gabelle became the ultimate symbol of royal tyranny. The resentment burned silently for decades until the breaking point arrived. When the historic French Revolution finally erupted in 1789, the revolutionaries didn't just demand a constitution. One of their very first tactical acts was to storm the tax offices and completely abolish the salt tax. The struggle for survival had turned a seasoning into the fuse of a revolution. Because armies cannot march without preserved rations, cutting off an enemy's salt supply is the ultimate logistical death sentence. History is littered with conflicts fought entirely for this commodity. During the American Civil War, the Confederate South faced an immediate logistical nightmare. They had millions of cattle, but almost no domestic manufacturing infrastructure to preserve the meat for their troops. The entire Southern war effort relied on a single, massive geographic vulnerability: the Saltville Salt Works in Virginia. The Union Military Command understood this perfectly. They launched multiple bloody, high casualty military campaigns with a singular objective: destroy Saltville. In 1864, Union forces finally breached the defenses, completely demolished these salt wells, and left the Confederate Army's supply lines in absolute ruins. Without salt, Southern meat rotted in warehouses, soldiers starved on the front lines, and the Confederacy's collapse was drastically accelerated. Decades later, the same resource weapon was turned against India. The British Empire banned Indians from collecting or selling their own natural salt, forcing them to buy heavily taxed British imports. In 1930, Mahatma Gandhi recognized this bottleneck and launched the historic Salt March. He walked 240 miles to the Arabian Sea, reached down into the water, and picked up a small lump of natural salt, breaking the British Imperial law. This simple act of reclaiming a basic commodity sparked a massive wave of civil disobedience that ultimately fractured the foundations of the British Empire in India. The era of the global salt wars is over. The invention of artificial refrigeration and industrial canning completely broke the dependency. But humanity didn't escape the cycle. We simply shifted our survival requirements from preserving food to processing data and storing energy. The basic geopolitical reflex remains completely identical. Look at the global economic landscape today. Yesterday's absolute choke points were the physical salt routes of the Mediterranean, and today the world is scrambling over the new critical list, which now includes foundational metals like copper, silver, and lead alongside high tech bottlenecks. Everyone talks about the lithium triangle in South America, but the real crisis is the price shock factor. In 2025, trade restrictions and supply weaponization caused the global price of bismuth to skyrocket by 270% and antimony by 144%. A single regulatory signature can trigger an immediate economic crisis. And the bottleneck isn't just about who digs the rocks out of the ground, it's about who controls the refinery. Take rare earth elements, which are vital for everything from smartphones to guided missile defense systems. China only mines 69% of the world's rare earths, but through aggressive industrial strategy, it refines a staggering 91% of the global supply. If you don't own the refinery, you don't own the asset. Furthermore, while the media focuses entirely on lithium, a silent war is being fought over the secret salts of the high tech world. Invisible strategic assets like boron, where Turkey controls two-thirds of the world's entire reserves, or beryllium, where the US produces half of global supply to fuel critical technologies like the James Webb Telescope mirrors and nuclear shielding. Even the gas markets have their own invisible bottlenecks. Look at neon gas sourced from Ukraine or helium 3, which superpowers are quietly scrambling to secure for the future of quantum computing. And at the absolute peak of this resource pyramid sits the semiconductor foundry. Today, building a single advanced chip factory costs an eye watering $20 billion. Over 90% of the world's most advanced microchips are manufactured on a single, highly vulnerable island, Taiwan, inside the mega factories of TSMC. Just as Rome fought to protect its Via Salaria salt routes and Union armies marched to burn down the South's salt factories. Modern superpowers are positioning carrier strike groups around the South China Sea to secure or defend a tiny piece of silicon. Whether it's sodium chloride, NaCl, in the 17th century preventing food from rotting, or a microchip in the 21st century running artificial intelligence. If a single commodity becomes entirely indispensable to human survival, governments will always be willing to tax it, monopolize it, and go to war over it. Do you think we will ever break free from this resource trap, or is human history destined to repeat this exact cycle forever? The materials change, but the core law of geopolitics remains absolute. When a commodity is cheap and abundant, we treat it like background noise. But the moment resource scarcity intersects with national survival, the true nature of power is revealed. Empires are built by the visionaries who secure these bottlenecks, and empires collapse when those bottlenecks are broken by new technologies. But the way forward is changing through a concept known as reverse dependency. Instead of trying to own the physical mines, regions like Europe are fighting back by building monopolies on highly specialized expertise and industrial equipment, such as the Dutch company ASML, which builds the only lithography machines capable of printing advanced chips. If you can't own the salt, you own the only machine that can harvest it. Simultaneously, the race for alternative engineering is accelerating. Cobalt is actively being phased out of batteries in favor of safer, cheaper phosphate and sodium based chemistries. In the US, data from 2025 shows that for critical minerals like antimony, bismuth, and tungsten, a circular economy of advanced recycling has already become the primary source of domestic supply. The next global superpower won't just be the nation with the deepest mines. It will be the one that dominates human capital and foundational research. According to the Belfer Index, while the US currently leads the world in raw AI computing power, the gap is narrowing rapidly. China already leads in AI data collection and human capital, and is the most likely power to completely overtake the West in biotechnology and global pharmaceutical production. The future belongs to those who can design their way out of resource dependency entirely, turning today's priceless strategic assets back into tomorrow's common sand. We just saw how empires will manipulate global trade and risk total collapse over a single indispensable resource. But what happens when a major military conflict breaks out in Europe today and the entire NATO defense grid completely runs out of its most critical energy asset? Click the video on your screen right now to see how synthetic e fuels manufactured from nothing but air and water are quietly transforming into Europe's ultimate weapon when the fuel stops coming.